So India is nothing short of emerged on the world stage. It is just the first day of the G20 summit, and New Delhi has done what was being dubbed as a big challenge till just yesterday. A summit declaration has been released, and it's being said that there was 100% consensus from all member nations. And this summit declaration has about 83 paragraphs in total, and it is the first declaration without any footnotes whatsoever. So how did New Delhi manage to achieve this? Remember, it was not going to be an easy task, and it wasn't an easy task. In all ministerial meetings leading up to this, no joint statements had been issued at all by the member nations. There was always going to be too many differences that had to be worked through. But now, there exists a 37-page long document with countries with polar opposite views who've now come pretty much on the same page as part of this declaration. The most contentious issue has been that of the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, what is interesting to note is that the declaration does not mention Russia even once. But the Indian delegation has pretty craftfully done two things. One, it has highlighted the immense human suffering that has been caused due to war. And secondly, it has urged for resolutions to end the war, and it has asked nations to not fan it further. Now, the IMF has said that nearly about 80% of the growth, of course, is going to come from the emerging markets. So if countries such as India are going to drive the future growth, then their presence, of course, becomes more of a necessity than a formality in these kind of groupings. Now, there's been a visible push for the global south. The African Union is part of the G20 because of India's push for the move. Now, after all, 6 of the 12 fastest growing economies are from Africa. Now, India finds itself at the center of global trade discussions. The G20 accounts for nearly about 85% of the global GDP, 75% of the world trade, and 2/3 of the global population. And India, interestingly, has leveraged its position to attract more investments. The G20 presidency, in fact, keeps changing each year, and that's been the norm since 2008. When the baton had been passed last year, New Delhi was quick to share its vision of how no one should be left behind. Up next, it will now be the turn of Brazil to take over the presidency for the year 2024. And world leaders hope that Brazil will be able to extend India's vision of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which refers to the fact that the world is one family. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, has happened today so far, we're being joined in by my colleague Bhairavi Singh, who's been tracking the developments very closely for us since this morning. Good evening to you, Bhairavi. This, of course, is a big moment. The G20 summit in New Delhi has a joint statement, and now all countries with complete consensus have arrived at a joint statement that mentions Ukraine, and this is something that's been agreed upon. How much of a challenge was it actually to get all the world leaders to, in fact, agree to this joint statement?
Right, Saleh. In the words of Amitabh Kant himself, he said considerable time was spent in negotiations for the paragraphs that had to mention the war in Ukraine. So you can imagine how many hours were spent negotiating with countries in the West, particularly some of them who were already vocal before they arrived in India. Rishi Sunak, for one, had made quite a harsh statement before he flew down to India. America and France were also talking about how Russia needs to be held accountable, but that tone has changed. Remember, all members of the G20 have a veto power, so even if one country doesn't agree to the communique or the wording of it, it will not pass through. The other interesting part of this, Saleh, is the fact that the joint communique draft resolution has been put out to the media today itself. It usually happens on the second day. But I imagine that there was so much speculation going about in the media about what was the wording, the blank paragraph left for dissent, that there would be a chair statement instead of the communique. Amitabh Kant made it very clear in that press conference that there was 100% consensus on both the economic issues in the 83 paras of the draft resolution and the 8 paras on geopolitical situation as well. So that's one achievement in itself. The other achievement is to get everybody on board on the economic issues of climate mitigation, of sustainable development goals, on global taxation, on cryptocurrency regulation, on multilateral development banks, and all of that India claims has also been done in that draft resolution that has been put out and conveyed to all the other countries and accepted by them as well, Saleh.
Absolutely indeed. Now, the fact that the G20 forum came into existence to address macroeconomic issues of the countries around the world. But what we are looking at is that although G20, it's a forum to address economic issues, it is more and more getting overshadowed in some ways by geopolitical issues. How much of a challenge is it going to be for G20 to, in fact, to ensure that the focus remains on issues of economy rather than, for forums like this to be dominated by issues that concern more with geopolitics?
Right, absolutely, Saleh. The fact that, India has tried to wean away the focus from geopolitics and saying that a large part of the world is not concerned about Russia's war in Ukraine, and rightly so. But I think the point that the West is making is that the Russian war has had its economic impact. It's had an impact on the food security and the energy security. So it is as much a geopolitical issue as it is an economic. Having said that, you rightly said that this is an forum for economic issues. It was started in 1999 with the Asian crisis. In 2008, it was elevated to the heads of state level with the financial crisis, with the Lehman Brothers crashing in America. But it has also resolved issues of politics like the Iran nuclear crisis. It's also come together for the pandemic. So clearly, it spills over to geopolitics as well. But you're right that we have to keep weaning it back to the economic issues of recession. 1/3 of the world is in recession and 70% of the world is in debt. So all these issues are pertinent and are important to be highlighted, Saleh.
Absolutely indeed, Bhairavi Singh. Thank you very much indeed for joining us and getting us all those details there. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.